Are you looking for inspiring conversations about faith, film, and life? You're in the right place. Here's the host who knows the right questions to ask, Father Edward Looney.
Hey everybody, it's Father Edward, and one of the things about Christmas, especially if you have young people in your life, you might be looking to share a Christmas story with them. I myself have written a children's book for Christmas called Breakfast in Bethlehem, now published as Father Looney's Christmas Stories. I have another Christmas story that I just wrote this year that I'm circulating for publication right now, so we'll see if that surfaces with a publisher and comes out next year. But a cute little story I think people will enjoy. And today I'm speaking with a very noted children's author, has several children's books out there. He's been on the podcast several times. You might remember him from Our Lady's Wardrobe, another book about Mary and her many titles, which is a beautiful book too. He has a few other Christmas books too, about the Christmas donkey, the grumpy ox, and I have his books right here as I'm looking at my shelf, so I could just look over and see them. But Anthony DeStefano has come out with a new children's book for this year. It's called Christmas in Heaven, a beautiful story, a lot of teaching. You know, that's kind of the great gift of some of these books, is that there's teachings underneath the stories, and the author does things with great intention, and sometimes you don't detect that unless you are able to get a behind-the-scenes look with them. So hopefully that's what this conversation does today. So thanks so much, Anthony, for joining me to talk about Christmas in Heaven.
Thank you for having me as always. I always love being on your program, Father.
Yeah, so tell me first, I know for myself, a few times, so the one children's book for Christmas I wrote, originally published as Breakfast in Bethlehem, someone called me and they said, hey, I have a story. I think you should write it. And they told me the name, and I had to think about it. And I said, maybe I'll write it. And then I was driving, and the story came to my mind. And, actually just about a month ago, I woke up. I had a phrase on my mind, like as I woke up. I don't know if I had a dream or what it was, but it was very clear to me that you should write a story about this. And so I did. And so we'll see again if it gets published. But for me, sometimes it's just kind of a random inspiration that comes to me. And I'm like, oh, well, this must be of God. So I don't know for you, like how your stories come about, but what's the story behind Christmas in Heaven?
Well, in general, that's a very interesting subject about inspiration. I think, it always comes to someone randomly. An idea comes from nowhere. But there's something more to it than that. I think we have our antenna up and tuned in to possible ideas for children's books. If you want to listen to opera and you go on Spotify, you don't turn into a jazz channel. You don't tune into a rock station. You tune into an opera channel. Well, if my mind is tuned in to possible ideas for children's books, so if I'm at Mass and I hear in one of the readings a story about a little animal, for instance, immediately I'm probably the only guy in the church that's thinking, oh, maybe that's a children's book. So I'm tuned into it, and sometimes it's because of a bad reason, because I'm distracted during Mass or during the Rosary or adoration or something. But yes, it's interesting the way those ideas work. For this book, I always am interested in writing books about the true meaning of Christmas. Christmas has obviously been secularized beyond recognition. There can't be too many good books about Christmas. And as you said, I've already written several Christmas books already from the perspective of Joseph's donkey or Grumpy Old Ox or the Star of Bethlehem. This time I wanted to try something different. When I was a kid, I didn't understand why we gave each other presents at Christmas, and we didn't give them to each other at Easter time or Thanksgiving or Halloween. And I remember asking my father this when I was very, very young. And the way he answered it was that, Christmas is Jesus' birthday. We can't give Jesus a present because he's in heaven. So what we should do is give each other presents because that's what makes Jesus happiest. And that's something that any child could understand, because all children understand the concept of gift giving and birthdays. So that idea was, rolling around my head for many years. How do I write a story about Jesus's birthday. And the way that I finally was able to turn it into a children's book was to just simply have a little boy who is sad because his grandmother has died and it's Christmas time. And he's wondering how she's celebrating Christmas in heaven. And so his grandfather, the husband of the woman who has died, sits the boy on his knee and tries to paint a consoling picture of him, of heaven, and the big birthday party that's going on there, with all the angels and saints, and of course, Our Lady and Jesus, and yes, his grandmother too. So that's the genesis of the book. It's a book about the true meaning of Christmas, but also an introduction to the angels and saints, and also a book about grieving with hope in the resurrection, and hope in life everlasting in heaven.
Yeah, so you mentioned a lot of the saints, and there are a lot of saints. Here are just a handful of them. It makes a little litany, if you will. So there's Saint Lucy, it's Saint Joseph, Saint Nick, and Saint Anthony, Saint Thomas Aquinas, Saint Lawrence, Saint Valentine, Saint Martin de Porres, Cecilia, Gregory, Luke, and then there was Saint Patrick, and there's more. So
Yeah.
the book it's told in a rhyming style as well, which is very much what a style that you write in, this lyrical rhyme. So maybe the names are chosen because of that. But are these your favorite saints, or how do you go about selecting them? And with them, you kind of see some of their stories, right? So Saint Luke is painting the Blessed Mother, or is just painting in the story. He's the patron saint of artists. He's known to have painted an image of Our Lady. You have Cecilia and Gregory linked. Of course, Cecilia, the patron saint of musicians. Gregory was chant. So, there's kind of little teachings about who the saints are, even, and what you describe and what you write. But how do you select these saints?
Well, because I wanted the book to be an introduction to the angels and saints, I naturally wanted to include the most famous ones that most people know. So that's why I included St. Michael the Archangel, and St. Joseph, and St. Francis, St. Patrick, St. Valentine, Joan of Arc, Our Lady, of course. These are the saints that most people know. But I wanted to include saints that people didn't know as well. So, of course, I have St. Honore, who's the patron saint of baking, because you have to have a birthday cake in heaven. And as you mentioned, St. Cecilia and Gregory, because you have to have singing at a birthday party. The story dictates everything. And I wanted to definitely show every saint in this book doing something that they were well known for. And I got lucky a lot of times, because a lot of these saints, St. Thomas is famous for writing and reading. And so I have him reading by the fire while St. Martha is busy doing work, as usual, as she's depicted in the gospel. And St. Francis comes barreling through the door with a bunch of animals. What's also interesting is the saints I couldn't include. And for instance, I have a devotion to St. Padre Pio, for instance, but he's mostly known for having the stigmata and for bilocating and for knowing people's sins before they confess them. It's very hard to depict all that in a children's book. Or St. Maximilian Kolbe, who died in a concentration camp. I really don't want to have a swastika in this children's book. So the story dictates everything, and at the end of the book, I don't know if you saw this, is a glossary that has a little paragraph with a thumbnail illustration with a little paragraph description of what each saint is famous for and what they're doing in the book, so parents and children can refer back.
So when it comes to a children's book like this, and again, I have a whole stack, and now I'm a pastor of a school, a parish with a school. So I'm able to grab one of these books, take them, and read it to the kindergarten or 4K or whatever. So happily could share these stories, right? But is the intention with a children's book? I'm assuming it's something that a kid would return to, especially year after year in these very early years. So maybe in 3K it's read to them, in 4K it's read to them, in kindergarten maybe they're able to start reading it or first grade or whatever. But there's a value in returning to the same story again and again, isn't there?
Yes, in fact, that's why I try to have a lot of layers in these books. One of the reasons why I got into writing children's books in the first place is because I'm, like anyone else, awed and amazed by the parables of Jesus. The most uneducated people could understand them, and yet they're filled with depths that the greatest scholars and theologians are still trying to, analyze and discuss today. And I always thought from the very beginning of my writing career, it would be wonderful to put into children's books some layers of meaning so that you can entertain the children, but also to intrigue and teach the adults, because this is the point. So many adults have to read these books to the kids. Sometimes they read them to the children 5 times, 10 times, 20 times. So I've got this huge captive audience of adults that need to be reminded about the good news too. So you have to make it entertaining for them. It's really the same idea that Walt Disney had when he came up with Disney World, was he wanted to come up with a place where children could have fun, but the parents weren't going to be bored, where they could have fun too. So it's the same thing. I'm writing for adults every bit as much as I'm writing for children.
Yeah, and what does it mean to you then to know that there's all of these kids in Catholic households throughout the country, maybe even the world, that are reading this story? There must be some, delight in that here you are, the creator, the mastermind behind a story, and all of these kids are coming to learn. And so what does that mean to you as an author?
It's a lot of different feelings. One, it's very humbling. I pray. One of the reasons why I have a lot of ideas for books, I think, is I pray every day to Mary, the mother of the author of life. She's the mother of the author of life. And I say, please never let these ideas in the well dry up, because the author of life, I mean, I've got to be praying to the mother of the author of life. I want to be an author. So first of all, it's humbling. And of course, it's joyful and gratifying. If a little kid comes up to me and say, hey, this is my favorite book, or a parent writes to me, as they often do, not bragging, just saying, I'll get notes from parents. Oh, my children love this book, or my child was sad because of someone, the grandpa that died or something, and this book cheered them up or something. You hear something like that, it not only makes you joyful, but it sort of validates your whole existence. You know what I mean? Like I could die tomorrow, and I feel, hey, I did what I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think that validation, though, just encourages you to keep going. I've been reading Anne Catherine Emmerich and her Mystical Revelations for Tan Books as a podcast. And so, it's a very daunting, it's laborious. But, the other day I got a note from a listener that said, hey, I really appreciate this. It means so much to me. And that gives you enough encouragement to go on. Or, I've written a few Marian devotionals, and for someone to comment about what you wrote about this person truly touched them, it just gives you kind of, it helps you to say, this is something I can keep dedicating my time to, and this is making a difference, and it is impacting people. So, yeah, I'm just always curious, about other authors and how they receive that, I guess. And yeah, you said, and we talked earlier about inspiration, and I meant to say this back then, but you just mentioned, you pray. And so sometimes these ideas come as you pray. And I remember, and I quote you sometimes actually, but in an interview a while back, you said, a lot of times my ideas come to me when I pray the rosary.
Yes.
And so I whenever I go talk about the rosary, sometimes I share that little tidbit that if you pray the rosary, maybe you'll receive inspiration about something. And and St. Louis de Montfort, he said the same thing about the rosary, but when he was addressing preachers, he said, pray the rosary before you preach or prepare a homily, and you will be inspired. So, yeah, you have to be a person of prayer, and I think it's very evident from your stories that is indeed the case.
Wow.
One of the things you touched upon was the notion of grief and death. The book also includes a note about purgatory. So, why is it important for us to talk about death and grieving, especially around the holidays, to have that little reference to purgatory as well?
Well, the holidays are joyful, but it's one of the ironies of life that the more joyful our life is, the more joyful holidays are, the more joyful our marriages, the more joyful our relationships are, the sadder we must inevitably be as those people in our life die and move on. It's just a sad irony of life, and that's why the holidays, especially Christmas, suicides, skyrocket. There's a lot of people who are very, very sad around the holidays, and that's one of the reasons why I'm never afraid to address the topic of death. because grief is something that children understand. They have to face loss too. They deal with the death of pets, the death of grandparents. They deal with lots of different kinds of permanent loss when they move neighborhoods or move to a different house or something, a different neighborhood. You can't just pretend that these sad feelings aren't there. If you just try to sweep them under the rug, then they don't go away. They fester, they grow, they become complexes, psychological problems, all kinds of psychological problems later on. Luckily, our faith is very optimistic when it comes to life and death. We don't believe that death has the final word. We believe the final word is resurrection and life in heaven. So we're by imparting that message to children and reminding adults of it, it enables them and us to grieve in a healthy way, and that's very important. As far as purgatory goes, I didn't want to give the impression that I don't believe in purgatory. This is a book about heaven, but if you just have, the grandfather saying his wife has gone to heaven, it's going to be like so many of those Catholic funerals we go to, where the person who's deceased is eulogized and canonized. And while I'm sympathetic to those people, I understand they're grieving and they want to think nice things. You never want to deprive the person who has died of prayers, because they may be in purgatory and they may need those prayers. So I wanted to make sure that while I didn't focus on purgatory here, it's a book about heaven, that I at least mentioned it. It's a doctrine of the church. It's been a doctrine of the church since the beginning. It's based on the fact that, as Revelation 21 says, nothing unclean can enter heaven. The fact is, there are people who have died who have been saved by Christ, but they have on their souls some stain of sin that has already been forgiven, and sometimes these souls have an attachment to sin as well. Purgatory is the place where we are cleansed of those imperfections so that we could see God face to face without any shame or guilt or attachment to what is unholy. And as I say in this book, very, very easy to explain that to children. If you're going to go meet the president or the pope, or you're going to go to a big wedding or a party, you would presumably wash your face, brush your teeth, comb your hair, maybe get out of your gym clothes. Well, heaven's the biggest party of them all. And we're going to be meeting the most important person of all, the Lord. So purgatory is the place where we get cleaned up for that. And I included a note at the beginning to help parents teach that to children.
As we talk about death and grieving, we talk about it especially in the context of people we know. So, your mother has died, your grandmother or grandpa or whoever, maybe a brother or sister has passed away. And so, you kind of think about heaven, what's it like for them on Christmas Day, all of that. But, the topic of death and grieving is kind of there on Christmas and in the Christmas season, because Jesus is born to die. He has come to earth to rescue us from sin and death by dying on the cross and conquering death so that we might live forever in heaven. So really, there's that saying, he was born to die. And that's really, if we look at Christmas and see it, well, we see death right there, that this child, and then right after he was born, Herod sentences all of these young kids to death. So, in the immediacy of Christmas, we celebrate December 28th, the Feast of the Holy Innocents. So you have death in that regard too. So, and then you have
like baptism, just like baptism, we're baptized into Christ's death.
Yeah.
So even when you're a little baby, the church is introducing this topic of death, because it's so tied together, because we're in this life for one reason and one reason only, so that when we die, we can go be with the Lord in heaven.
Yeah, and even for the three kings, their gifts, kind of, one of them, the incense and the myrrh. The myrrh is for his burial. So Christmas is filled with these images foreshadowing what is to come in Christ's story. So when you picture heaven on Christmas Day, is basically the story what you envision, you think?
No, obviously this is a playful portrait of the saints. One of the ways that we're able to deal with the subject of grief, which is a tough subject, in a lighthearted way here, is to have the saints doing some humorous things. We have, as I said, St. Francis coming through the door with animals, St. Martha cleaning up behind, not able to clean all the mess. So St. Jude, who's the saint of hopeless causes, coming with a vacuum cleaner to help her out. This is a lighthearted portrayal of the saints, but the subject of heaven is very easy to talk about to children too. And I want to say this, heaven is God's home. When people die and those people love God, they go to live in God's home. They move homes. They go from their home here on earth to their home with God in heaven. And that's something that all children can understand because they're very familiar with the concept of going over grandma's house or their aunt's house or to a different building or a different school. They understand the concept of moving from place to place. So the more we're able to show children how wonderful a place heaven is, the more consolation they'll experience when they're grieving about loved ones who have moved to that place. Now, beyond that, though, I've written a whole book about heaven called A Travel Guide to Heaven for Adults. It was my first book. And in that book, I focus on something that I think people should focus on more, and especially at funerals, and that is that we're going to see these people again someday after the resurrection. They're not just going to be ghosts. We're going to be seeing, if your mother has died and she's gone to heaven and you go to heaven, then someday you're going to be able to run up to her and hug her, embrace her, feel the warmth of her skin, hear her voice again. That heaven is going to have a physical component, and I don't think that's emphasized enough when we talk about our beautiful Christian faith.
Yeah, and the new heaven and the new earth, and the final resurrection of the body. That's for sure. So maybe one last thing about the book. So you list all these saints. Kind of the value, I'm assuming, is to kind of introduce young people to, you can ask the saints to pray for you.
Well, the saints, they're very important for two reasons. First of all, they're our friends. They can help us. They're not up in heaven twiddling their thumbs. They're more alive, more powerful than we are because they're with God, who is the source of all life and power. So they can intercede for us with their prayers. If we're having a problem, we have no problem asking our friends and family to intercede for us, to pray for us. So why not ask the saints in heaven? This is something our Protestant brothers and sisters don't quite understand. They think we're praying to the saints as if they're idols. No, we're just asking the saints to pray for us. The second reason they're so important is because they're the best role models in the world. Christians are called to be Christ-like. But how do you do that? Of course, we have the New Testament and as a guide. But how do you be Christ-like in your circumstances, in your life? The saints are examples of how to live out the gospel across different times, different cultures, different professions. So, for instance, today, and we're living in this world of, where the government is always persecuting our Christian values. How do you live in a time like this? Well, you look at St. Thomas More, who was a very powerful statesman and lawyer, and you see how he responded and fought back when he was under political pressure that was against, say, the sanctity of marriage. So the saints have their role models, and they're our friends and can help us.
That is one of the many themes that people can find in Christmas in Heaven, a story now available from Sophia Institute Press by our guest today, Anthony DeStefano. You can get a copy. You can share it with your local Catholic school, maybe gift it to your local parish, share it with your children or grandchildren, nieces or nephews. Let them know the story of the saints and how they might celebrate Christmas in heaven as well, and introduce them to so many of the themes contained in the book. So if people want to get a copy of the book or learn more about you, Anthony, how can they do so?
If they want to learn more about my books and me, I have a website. If your listeners don't mind my long Italian name, it's www.anthonydestefano.com. I don't sell books there, but they could get books through Sophia Institute Press, through EWTN, through Amazon.com, wherever books are sold.
That's wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Anthony. And I'm sure that we'll have another conversation sometime in the future, because I bet there will be another story that you'll be telling real soon.
Coming right up for 3 books the next year.
If you liked today's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. And don't forget to stay up to date with what Father Edward is doing by following him on Facebook, X, or Instagram at the handle @FrEdwardLooney. Thanks for listening, and please join Father Edward again next time for another inspiring conversation.